Tokyo is not supposed to have slums. In the mind of the global traveler, Tokyo is the gold standard of urban perfection. A place where the trains are never late, the streets are scrubbed clean, and safety is an absolute guarantee at any hour of the night. For decades, this city was the country people imagined when they thought about the absolute peak of human organization. We saw the neon canyons of Shinjuku, the luxury boutiques of Ginza, and the high-tech fortress of stability that seemed to defy the chaos found in every other megacity on Earth. It was a society that appeared to have solved the problems of poverty and decay through sheer discipline and economic might. That story is true when you stay on the main roads and follow the tourist maps. But here is the thing, the map tells a different story. Away from the famous skylines and the gaps between the high-speed rail lines and the gleaming skyscrapers, a different version of Tokyo is quietly taking shape, and it is a version the government does not want you to see. In 2026, the cracks in the Japanese miracle have finally reached the heart of the capital. We are witnessing the rise of the invisible slums. Places where the system has not just slowed down, but has completely failed. The scary part is not that these areas are violent or chaotic in the way we expect from other global cities. The scary part is that they are hidden in plain sight, tucked away in cyber cafes, tiny coffin apartments, and aging concrete blocks that the modern world has simply decided to forget. This is what collapse looks like when it happens in the most expensive city on the planet. It is a quiet collapse, a breakdown of the social contract where the promise of a stable life has been replaced by a desperate day-to-day struggle for survival. We are seeing a generation of invisible people, elderly citizens with no families to care for them, and young workers who have been priced out of existence, living in spaces no larger than a storage closet. The buildings are still there, the roads are still there, the infrastructure is still there, but the hope that once powered this city is starting to vanish. Today we are looking at the dark side of the Tokyo map. We are exploring the neighborhoods and the hidden social structures where the first world facade is crumbling toward a reality that feels disturbingly familiar to the developing world. From the aging residents of Sanya to the modern-day refugees living inside 24-hour internet cafes, we are revealing the warning signs that the world's largest urban economy is reaching its breaking point. This is not just a story about Tokyo, it is a preview of the future for every major city facing a rising cost of living and a disappearing safety net. Today we see why Tokyo may not be the exception, but the warning sign for us all. This is the insider map, where the future is already breaking. To understand how Tokyo reached this point, you have to look back at what this city and this country used to represent. Japan was not always a symbol of decline. After the devastation of World War II, it became one of the greatest economic success stories in modern history. This was the era of the Japanese miracle, a time when the world watched in awe as brands like Sony, Toyota, and Nintendo conquered the global market. In the 1980s, Tokyo was the center of the universe. The land under the Imperial Palace was famously said to be worth more than the entire state of California. For a while, the promise worked. It was the era of the salaryman, a social contract that guaranteed a stable job for life in exchange for loyalty. Families were moving into the city, urban centers were expanding, and the middle-class dream felt permanent. If you worked hard and followed the rules, the system looked after you. You had a home, a pension, and a place in the most organized society on Earth. Then the math changed. The problem did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, hidden behind the persistent glow of the neon signs. It started in the early 1990s when the great economic bubble finally burst, leading Japan into what economists now call the lost decades. Suddenly, the growth that everyone took for granted simply stopped. But while the numbers on the spreadsheets were stagnating, the social reality on the ground was undergoing a much more radical transformation. As economic stagnation took hold, the job for life disappeared. Stable employment was replaced by temporary contracts and part-time gig work. For the first time in the modern era, a generation of Japanese youth found themselves unable to enter the middle class their parents had built. This shift in the math of survival led to a demographic shift. Young people delayed marriage because they couldn't afford a home. They had fewer children or no children at all. The birth rate collapsed and the population began to age at a speed no other nation had ever experienced. To hide the decay in the countryside, the government and the economy doubled down on Tokyo. They poured resources into the capital, creating a shiny facade of progress that masked the growing rot elsewhere. But you cannot run a megacity on temporary wages forever. As the cost of living in the capital continued to rise and wages remained frozen for 30 years, the pressure began to cook the social fabric from the inside out. The invisible slums were born from this pressure. They weren't built with bricks and mortar, they were built with desperation. People who could no longer afford even the smallest traditional apartment began to drift into the cracks of the city. They became the net cafe refugees, living in plastic cubicles. They became the residents of coffin apartments, where a bed is the only furniture you own. The problem is that for decades, the world, and Japan itself, preferred to look at the skyscrapers rather than the people living beneath them. We chose to believe the story of the perfect city. But once the math changed, the map started changing with it. The stability of the past is gone, leaving behind a city that looks like a first world titan on the outside, but is increasingly functioning on third world survival tactics on the inside. The easiest way to understand Tokyo's crisis is not to start with the national numbers. It is to look at the places where the crisis has become physical. If you look at an official tourist map of Tokyo, everything looks perfect. A seamless grid of neon and glass. But the map tells a different story if you know where to look. Away from the main stations, there are neighborhoods that the system is quietly trying to erase. Take Sanya, for example. For years, the government has attempted to wipe this name from official maps, renaming the area to hide its history. But on the ground, the reality is impossible to ignore. This is a place where the demographic crisis is not a statistic, but a face. It is a neighborhood of aging day laborers, the men who physically built the skyscrapers of the 1980s but were discarded when the economic math changed. Today they live in tiny three-mat rooms, surviving on dwindling pensions in a city that is increasingly moving on without them. An aging society sounds abstract until you walk through streets where the only sound is the shuffling of feet in a soup kitchen line. But the most disturbing part of Tokyo's hidden collapse isn't in the old neighborhoods, it's in the high-tech heart of the city. We have always been told that Japan's internet cafes were a symbol of a connected, advanced society. But in 2026, they have become the primary housing for thousands of net cafe refugees. These are people who work 40 hours a week but cannot afford a deposit on a traditional apartment in a city where housing prices have disconnected from reality. A birth rate collapse sounds abstract until you see the gekisemakus, the coffin apartments. These are rooms with no windows and barely enough space to lie down. In many cases, the walls are so thin that you can hear the breathing of the person in the next unit. This is what a housing crisis looks like in a first world nation that refuses to admit it has a poverty problem. An empty apartment block in the suburbs is not just a property, it is a sign that the middle-class dream of owning a home has been replaced by the nightmare of simply finding a place to sleep. If you walk through the back streets of older wards like Adachi or Arakawa, you can see the signs of a shrinking tax base. You see schools that have been converted into elderly care centers because there are no longer enough children to fill the classrooms. You see silent shopping streets where the only shops remaining are pharmacies and clinics. These are shrinking cities hidden inside a megacity, trying to maintain massive infrastructure with a population that is slowly disappearing. The buildings are still there, the roads are still there, but the feeling of a growing, vibrant capital has been replaced by a quiet, physical rot. You see elderly residents sitting alone in parks that were built for children who never arrived. You see a city that is clean, quiet, and seemingly perfect. But underneath that surface, the social fabric is being torn apart. This is the physical map of the silent collapse, a world where the architecture of the past is being used to house the desperation of the future. The numbers tell one story, but these streets tell another. What makes Tokyo's crisis so important is that it does not look like the end of the world. It does not look like the slums we have seen in movies or on news reports from other continents. It looks organized, it looks clean, it looks quiet, and that is exactly why so many people miss it. This is what collapse looks like when it happens quietly. It is a silent collapse where the buildings remain standing, but the social contract that once filled them with life has effectively expired. A shrinking country and a hollowed out middle class do not just lose population, they lose the very foundation of a functioning society. They lose the workers, the taxpayers, the students, and the caregivers who make a city feel like a home rather than just a machine. Eventually, a city like Tokyo loses the confidence that tomorrow will be larger or more prosperous than today. When young people are forced to choose between a plastic cubicle in an internet cafe or starting a family, they choose survival. The result is a capital that is technically the largest on Earth, but one that is quietly running out of a future. Tokyo may be the first clear map of a future that many rich countries are walking toward. What is happening in the hidden back streets of Shinjuku and the aging concrete blocks of Sanya is not a local Japanese anomaly. It is a preview of the pressures facing every major global hub. We see the same warning signs of a housing crisis and economic stagnation spreading to cities like London, New York, Seoul, and Milan. These are places where the cost of existence has become so high that the very people who keep the city running, the delivery drivers, the cleaners, the office clerks, are being pushed into the shadows. The math of the 20th century was built on the idea that the city would always grow and the system would always provide. But in 2026, the map tells a different story. It shows us that even the most advanced infrastructure cannot save a society if the people within it can no longer afford to live, dream, or reproduce. Japan is not the exception to the rule of global progress. Japan is the warning sign that the rule itself has changed. The invisible slums of Tokyo are a physical signal that the future is already breaking. It is a reminder that a first world facade can hide a third world reality if we refuse to look at what is happening behind the neon lights. Tokyo is not collapsing with a bang, but with the silent closing of an internet cafe door and the quiet shuffling of an elderly resident in a room the size of a closet. Japan may not be the exception. Japan may be the preview. Drop a comment and tell me which country you think is next. Subscribe for more maps like this every week. This is the Insider Map, and where the future is already breaking.